You launched the campaign tonight officially. I guess right now that this is where the real work begins for you.
Yeah, although in a way, I was a candidate 4 years ago in 2015, and I started working on that campaign a year before. So this has in a way been a 5-year effort to become Liberal Member of Parliament for Huron-Bruce so that Huron-Bruce can have a progressive voice in Ottawa.
But it hasn't had that quote-unquote progressive voice for the last 12 years or so. Since Paul Steckley was the MP here,
Yeah.
and a lot of people kind of changed over those 12 years. So how do you go about changing their minds again?
I think I just go to people and make the case. It's time to have a louder voice in Ottawa. It's time for people to feel that they're getting strong representation. And I also believe very strongly that the Trudeau government, in its first 4 years, has put out a very progressive agenda, lowering taxes for middle class, creating benefits for young working families with children. And it's a start, it's a beginning. And we need to move forward. We need to keep going forward with what's been begun. And we just can't go backward. We can't go back to the past in this country. We can't afford that.
You were mentioning inside there were two competing visions. One would say there's really four parties competing for one vision, and I'm taking like NDP, the Greens Party, all the other parties into it. So, how do you separate yourself from the others?
I think we have a government that has a record, right? So unlike 4 years ago, when it was a case of running against an incumbent government, Stephen Harper, challenging his agenda, now we have a government that has a record, that has an agenda, that has a track record of implementing the vast majority of what they put forward for Canadians. And I think there's a compelling case to be made. We need to keep building on what's been done. This is a work in progress. We've made a really good start, and we need to keep moving forward. We just can't turn this train around and start taking it back to the station. And that is essentially what the progressive Conservatives are putting forward. And for the other political parties, I return to the case in this riding and in many places across the country in this election. I think it is the competing visions of Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives and Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. Those are the practical choices for people about who is in a position to form the next government in Canada.
The one thing that the Liberals haven't been doing, Allan, is to bring up their achievements. Are they going to start doing that a little bit more during the campaign?
Yeah, my understanding as the campaign rolls forward, we'll hear a lot more about what the government has achieved. And it's substantive. There was a third-party report that was just released that has compared the Trudeau government and the Harper government, and they were looking at the success rate of implementing promises. And in the case of the Trudeau government, they found a majority, more than 50% of the promises had been fully kept and implemented, and another close to 40% had been at least partially implemented. And that's a pretty good record.
You were talking about rural issues, and you actually spoke to the Prime Minister face to face and told
Yep.
him straight up, you got to do more for rural communities if you want to get their vote.
Yep.
And for some people, that's a starting point. That's an absolute starting point here in Huron-Bruce for someone to, if they want to elect an MP, that's someone they want to start to. You obviously caught that. That's something that first and foremost on your mind.
Yeah, that's why I'm running. That's why I'm running here. This is the community where I was born and raised, grew up on a farm. So I feel like this is where I'm from. And I think people deserve to be heard from. And quite frankly, I think the political system in Canada kind of downplays rural small town communities. Most decisions are driven by people who live in big urban centers where there are more people, there are more votes. And I think those who govern need to be reminded on every file, okay, that's a good idea, but what is that going to mean for people who live in small towns? Where's the research on that? Show me the cost-benefit analysis for, policy X for a small town, for rural communities. And that's my commitment. I would do that on every file. Raise that question. What's it mean for people who live in a small town, on a farm, on a country road?
Is that something you would risk sticking your neck out for?
Absolutely. In a way I already have. I made it clear to them after the last election it was obvious when you looked at the electoral map, the Liberals were very successful in many other places and did not win seats in rural southwestern Ontario. And yet, many candidates like myself came very, very close. There is a base of support there. And when you put together the NDP vote and the Green vote and the Liberal vote, the Liberals would win every riding in southwestern Ontario. So I think there's a case to be made. We need to think long and hard about what is the best way to elect progressive members of Parliament in these ridings. And I was at the Labor Day events in Port Elgin on the weekend, on Monday, and it was very striking. Buzz Hargrove, a senior member of the Labour community, told people directly at that gathering, in this riding, you should be voting Liberal. Sorry, NDP, you have to vote Liberal in this riding. We have to defeat the Conservative incumbent in this riding, and voting Liberal is the way to do that.